There are men, my father, brown and strong, and they carry a banner of wondrous hue. With a mighty tread they swing along. Now I see white stars on a field of blue. You say that you see white stars on blue. Look how their stripes of red and white. It must be, yes, it must be true. Oh, dear God, if I had my sight. Hasten, sun, fling the window wide. Let me kiss the staff, the flag swings from, and salute the stars and stripes with pride. For God be praised, the American
Well, I was surfing the internet looking for Belmont memorabilia. Sometimes I just do that for fun. And I came across at an antique shop in Arizona that they had this series of memorabilia. What drew my attention to it originally was the program from the 1919 Belmont celebration for the returning World War I veterans. And then I started looking through it, and there were actually was a lot of other memorabilia, both personal photographs, battlefield photos, and other postcards and such from Private Leroy Mann, who lived on Beach Street. I was concerned that some World War I memorabilia collector from anywhere in the world would just snap it up, and it really should come back to Belmont. No one had picked it up, and the other groups weren't sure if they would acquire it or not. I just decided to buy it. I wanted people to actually see it, and thought it could be a good educational tool for the 100th anniversary of the Armistice. And so the Belmont Historical Society was gracious enough to do some background research and be the recipient of it, and they said that they would show it and they would use it as a teaching tool and they would help preserve it and keep it. I think it sort of takes the whole conflict and reduces it down to one Belmont resident's experience, which I think really makes it more relatable. It was interesting that he enlisted, he was age 29. If you look at his card, I mean, back then, well, I think back then people served older. As you got towards the Vietnam era, where the average age was 19, the age of the soldier went down, 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 down. But from what I understand, that enlisting at age 29 in World War I was not unusual. There are two photographs from the field. One looks like Private Mann in a truck with a gun on the front, and the other is him and someone else posing behind what looks like a machine gun nest of some sort. And again, like you say, the field is just destroyed. The trees are totally, limbless and just dead, and the waste, it's just there's nothing growing anywhere. I mean, it must have been horrible. How they even got those photographs, I don't know. As you say, of all the photographs in the collection, those two are in the worst condition. One would imagine that taking the pictures in the field was probably not the easiest thing to do back in 1918. The Americans were involved in the Battle of San Miguel, and the goal of that was to then go on and take Metz, which was a town. And from judging from the photograph in the postcard where they tore down the German statue in Metz, one would assume that that happened. And that Private Mann was there. He was assigned to the headquarters for his field artillery, so he wasn't in the battle per se, but he was there after the Battle of San Miguel, and there's some pictures of him in the memorabilia where he is on the battlefield, which was just looked like a wasteland in those photographs. And apparently he then looks like he went to Metz and got those photographed postcards and sent them back to his wife Josie. It's just, I can't even imagine what it would have been like to be in the trenches and be involved in that. We're fortunate that Private Mann returned home safely, and there are pictures of him growing older, but a lot of his compatriots didn't get that ability.
It was very primitive. In fact, we didn't even have weapons. We didn't have assault rifles. We had to use, in some cases, some French assault rifles like the Lebel, and also some Lee Enfields that we got from the British. And now, as the war progressed, we began to make them here in Springfield. The Springfield Armory made the famous Lee Enfield. Lee Enfield is like the state-of-the-art assault weapon for the First World War. But we were not able to provide all of our troops with Lee Enfields because we couldn't make them fast enough. So they wind up using mostly the Lebel. And the Lebel is a very dangerous weapon because it's breech-loaded, loaded from the top. And sometimes when you put the clip in from the top, it would create a spark. And people would, the piece would glow up, and you get facial injuries and all that. So it was not as nice. The Lee Enfield was much more efficient. It was bottom loaded, like it was a banana clip. So the big difference between the Lebel and the Lee Enfield, it's almost like two different generations of technology. So we got a mix of the two. We did not have our own artillery. We used the French 75mm howitzer. Howitzer means indirect fire, which means that an artillery battery can be way far back, 2, 3, 4, 5 miles back from the front. So it could fire all day, and it's protected. It's usually behind some berms, but then when you have the other one on the other side, which is, so you have maybe about 10 miles distance between this battery and that battery, neither of which can fire far enough to get to the other battery, which is why the front was so deadly. You can never eliminate the other guy's artillery because he's too far back, and he can't eliminate you. So you have this peculiar phenomenon of two batteries firing at will all day long. The French 75 is legendary. And you could actually, with a very well-trained crew, you could fire 20 shells a minute. So picture a battery of 12 75mm firing 20 a minute each. That's a continuous barrage on a position. It's devastating. And the result of it is the shell itself hurts people in two ways, causes two kinds of damage. If it blows up in the air, maybe 10, 15 meters high, and think of an upside down cone. So the bottom part of the cone is like a circle, like the bottom of a hoop skirt, coming down. So you can put maybe 6 or 7 people in that diameter, and every one of them gets showered with red hot, the equivalent of a ball bearing, sprayed red hot. So it causes either death or serious injury. In fact, the Germans actually didn't mind if it was just not killed. In fact, if you kill somebody, that was a disadvantage, because if you maim somebody, you take 2 more people out of business who have to carry the person back to the medical station. So the Germans were happy when people were getting hurt because it would tie up a lot more people. And the other kind of injury from the shells was a lateral surface shock wave, which what it does, it just blows your legs off. That's why when you see parades of veterans in France, a lot of them have 1 or 2 legs missing, because a common thing was that concussion wave across the surface, 1 or 2 feet high, would blow your legs off. That was great for them, because the Germans like that, because you're lying there bleeding out, so you've got to get somebody to help you get back to a surface. So you lose 3 people. You lose the guy who got hurt, and you lose 2 other people who are going to carry him. There were between 180 and 200,000 boys from Massachusetts alone who were either volunteered or enlisted, were drafted. Out of that, only 26,000 were in the Yankee Division. You have 4 regiments. 101st is Boston, downtown, like urban Boston, which is called the Irish Division, because most of the guys were Irish who had moved. They were new immigrants, some of whom gained their citizenship when they got off the boats, and they signed up in exchange for they get their citizenship when they're done. Very interesting way of becoming a citizen. The Middlesex County, the 102nd, let's go in order. The 102nd is Connecticut. There are several cities in Connecticut, Bridgewater, New Haven, that fed that pool. Then there's the 103rd, and that was basically Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont. And the 104th was basically 50% of it was Middlesex County. All the towns around that sort of donut around what they call the Metro West area. That was the 104th, plus Worcester, Springfield, Holyoke, and North Adams. The Yankee Division was the first division to be organized in the entire country. The first to arrive in France, and the first to be mobilized in the front. Pershing was a very, very good general who was very straight arrow, good organizer, good commander, understood military tactics, had experience fighting in Mexico. They were just different kind of people. And Edwards was, put it this way, Edwards was a soldier's soldier. Pershing was the commander soldier. So people, just to use a common parlance, people would be willing, they would take a bullet for Edwards. They would die for him. On the Pershing, they would do their job for him. Pershing had a prejudice. He kind of thought of the Yankee Division National Guardsmen as glorified Boy Scouts. He just didn't believe they were really serious, federally trained soldiers. So he had a bias going in. So the idea of these Boy Scouts getting to France first, getting trained and mobilized first was annoying to him. And Edwards was able to sort of organize that and get it done faster than the federal troops, which was a source of irritation. Also, we didn't do a serious amount of training here. Our training here was fairly primitive. We had young soldiers training with make-believe wooden weapons. They couldn't shoot them, they weren't real good weapons. Nothing wrong with that, because what it does is it trains them to be part of a unit, and it creates unit morale. That's all fine, but not a lot of real warfare training, gas training, for example. There just wasn't a whole lot of that because there wasn't a whole lot of materials for it. So when they went across, what happened was they went to Saint-Lazare, France. And then when they got to Saint-Lazare, they were trained across France to Neufchâteau, about a 500-mile trip. And they got on those trains, they were very enthusiastic. And when they got there, they chose a division, a French division, was matched up with the Yankee Division, and they trained them for several months. And all reports are that the training was very effective, very real by combat-hardened French veterans who taught them how to fire the 75, taught them how to hire the Lebel or the Lee Enfields, and taught them battlefield tactics and how to dig trenches and how to defend yourself in a trench and all of those things. And the other nice thing about it was the Yankee Division was local boys. And they were one of the benefits of being in the Yankee Division as opposed to a federal division is when you were in the Yankee Division, by and large, when you became part of a company, which is about 200 men, they usually came from one town. So they all knew each other. So there was camaraderie, and sometimes the chaplain would be a local priest or a local minister or a local rabbi. They all knew each other, played in the same football teams, baseball teams, and that sort of thing. So there was a lot of that unit cohesion already before they got there. That's a big benefit in terms of esprit de corps. So here comes off of the train all of these tall, good-looking, enthusiastic, singing American boys. Well, the women thought they were the most beautiful, handsome boys they've ever seen. And they would say, they sent us all their officers. Why did they send us all their officers? Where are the enlisted men? And they were told, they're all enlisted men, and only a small number, like 5% of them are officers. Well, why are they tall? Well, they're American. And we have better food, better supplies of food, better health, and our kids grow taller. Because the average French soldier was, on the whole, usually a foot shorter than the average American soldier. But the women didn't know that. What they saw were these cheerful, happy, enthusiastic, tall young men. So they were extremely excited, and it was a big, huge boost of morale on the part of the French people, because they were depressed. Every family lost a father or a brother or a cousin. So to see these fresh Americans meant we might get out of this alive. When we finished training in Neuchâtel, we were then sent, right after the holidays, up to a place called Chemin des Dames, which is Road of the Ladies. When they went to that front in February of 1918, the front was quiet. The German soldiers on that front had retreated from the front because they were waiting. They were being quiet because they were waiting for reinforcements to come. The Russian had surrendered at the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. So now the Germans are coming down to join the other Germans. So we were sent there as a kind of an initial preparation for the battle. Get used to hearing shells firing over, doing night raids, getting a little bit of action, not too much. And they were only there about a month, and they were withdrawn. The Yankee Division went back to Neuchâtel and got involved in another front called the Saint-Mihiel Front, replacing the 1st Division from New York. And there were a series of 4 battles against the German rear guard. See, a rear guard is units that protect the retreat. You can't retreat unless you have somebody behind you protecting you. Because if you don't have anybody behind you protecting you, then the assault group, which will be the Yankee Division, it's easy for them to cross over to the right and to the left, to flank on both sides, and then eventually surround. It's called a double enfilade. If they do that, and then if they surround the body of Germans, then they capture them and enclose them, and that ends they can't use those troops anymore. Basically, they were preparing for an eventual assault, but before you do an eventual assault, you have to be in place and be protected. It's a sort of a waiting game. Both sides are waiting, and all the Germans are doing is trying to penetrate the American positions. That was the 4. So what you had is 4 consecutive battles, and the first one was a place called Apremont. That's the one that's most famous. And what happened is an equivalent regiment, German Storm Battalion regiment, assaulted the 104th, which is, remember, Middlesex County and the western part of the state. And they attacked them early in the morning with heavy artillery, and then later on, assault. The 104th Regiment absolutely would not move. They stayed put. They fought all the way down to bayonet fighting. And the Germans were shocked, because the Germans' intention was to really hit the young Americans hard, scare them, send them out with their tails behind their legs, and to show that they were not ready, they were not fighters, and that the Germans would eventually prevail. Well, that didn't happen. They came back 3 nights later, did the same thing over again, and the same thing happened. They were stopped dead in their tracks. And that was an amazing outcome that no one ever anticipated. In fact, the general of the adjacent division that was fighting with them, General Passaga, was so impressed with the Americans that several days later, he assembled the 104th Regiment in a field and awarded a regimental Croix de Guerre, which is the first time in history that an American unit got a regimental Croix de Guerre, which means everybody gets it. And then the next battle was a place called Seicheprey. And at Seicheprey, the same repeat event occurred. The Storm Battalion attack was repelled and pushed back. And those are the boys from Connecticut, the 102nd. And they fought so hard that it got to the point, this is legendary, it got to the point where they brought the cooks into the fight because it was do or die. And there were stories about the cooks killing Germans with knives and meat cleavers. That's how close it got. Right. And then the next one was the 103rd, which was the New Hampshire, Maine, Vermont. They went through the same thing, same pattern, attack and repulse 4 times. And finally the 101st, which is the Irish Division out of Boston. In each case, the Germans were repulsed. When the information about that sort of made its way to Germany, they were saying, I don't know what the German word is, but the Americans, boys are crazy. They love fighting. Who are these boys? They're bigger, stronger, more determined, brave, and they got a real, even though it's only a division-wide issue, it sent a message to Berlin that it's going to be a long war. So now after the 4 battles in the Centennial salient underneath it, now the next attack is to move west about halfway from there to Paris in a place called Chateau Thierry. At Chateau Thierry, just below it, is the famous marine battle of Belleau Wood. And Belleau Wood stood between Chateau Thierry and Paris. It was a blocking area. So it was important to secure that. Now, the Marines had captured it, but this was a month before that, and they needed to be sure that that was reinforced. Interestingly enough, in spite of Pershing's animosity towards Edwards, because of the Yankee Division's behavior in the Centennial salient, he had to recognize that the Yankee Division were tough people. The National Guard soldiers had done a good job. Why don't we send them to be the people who would mop up Belleau Wood, but then also confront the Germans coming down from the north, from Soissons. So we were chosen to be the major blocking division to keep the Germans from doing a right flank coming down from Soissons, a right flank towards Paris, which we did successfully. That's a pretty big compliment for the Yankee Division. And then afterwards, the Yankee Division then went into the main part of the Aisne-Marne offensive. And the Aisne-Marne offensive was tough. And that was also, it was the Germans again retreating, but they have, like I mentioned, really tough rear guards. And we had a lot of trouble with that. It was our most difficult battle. Each regiment has 3 battalions and then so forth. Well, to keep all of your regiments, battalions, and companies lined up in a straight line, moving in a consistent pattern while you're conducting what they call a rolling barrage in front of them. So maybe your artillery batteries are firing maybe 50 to 100 yards in front of you, and they're moving ahead. It's easy for one company to move faster than another. And that was happening to us. So what happens when you move faster than another is not only do you subject your troops to friendly fire, they get ahead of the other ones, you also set yourself up for being flanked. So those are the tactical issues that were difficult. Because we hadn't fought this kind of war, no one had. This is a whole new kind of war. You did have wire communications in the trenches, because that's stationary, and you'd run wire down the trench. So you could communicate by telephone. But you can't do that in a war of maneuver. When you're trying to push the Germans back out of a sector, or even still better, surrounding them and capturing them, that's a moving war. First thing we need to do is participate in the Centennial offensive. And we came in from the northeast, and we met in the middle. We met the New Yorkers in the middle, and there were about 7 American divisions in the Centennial offensive. That was a very successful offensive because by that time the Germans are in clear retreat. Now remember, Centennial is a 60-mile long, about 15-mile wide, like a big piece of French bread, Italian bread, a little wider. This is a hill called Mont Sec, M-O-N-T-S-E-C, Mont Sec. It's a hill about the height, pretty much the same as the Blue Hills in Boston. So just think you're up on top of Blue Hills and you're looking east. And way down in the very, you can't see it from here, is a place called Metz, which at the time was a German city because it had been captured it was in Alsace-Lorraine. But today it's a French city. Well, looking towards Metz, 60 miles away, this is looking towards, remember, this is full of German divisions. And this is a hill about the size of Belmont Hill, maybe. You know, and you're looking down, and now this is the point of view that J. Watson Flett has. He's literally looking at this. And in a letter home he writes, on September 12th, the artillery opened up on the entire front. At H hour, our attacking battalion went over the top and behind a beautiful barrage took the first line of Boche trenches with very little trouble, and from then on it was comparatively easy sailing. We took a great many prisoners in the first system of trenches. We got them right in their dugouts where our artillery kept them down. The next morning we reached the last hills, and then before stretched the great plain, and in the distance the hills before Metz, Germany. As I sat there on my horse, I counted 15 villages on fire. This is a very important statement because there was a tendency for the Germans when they retreated to burn villages down and sometimes poison wells. It's a behavior that is hard to understand because they're leaving anyway, they're never going to be there again, and they're doing maximum damage on the way out. And it's just something that Flett was offended by because they could see the fires being set all the way across as far as the eye could see in the Saint Mihiel salient. That's his memory. The plan for the Germans was to divert about 10 divisions north, sort of flank left at the north and go back into the line up in the upper northern section of Meuse-Argonne. That's what the intention was. So we were given the order by Pershing to do a feint, F-E-I-N-T, which is a classic military maneuver. For us, we were given the order, while the other divisions were told to go straight north, we were told to go straight east and behave as if we were going to push them all the way past Metz to create an illusion of an attack. It was about creating a false impression that we were going to push them all the way back to Metz. Therefore, there would be no opportunity to move north to join their fellows up in Meuse-Argonne. It worked. They believed it. So they pushed back. They saw what they saw was a fresh superior force pushing forward. So they immediately went back into Germany instead of north to Meuse-Argonne. So basically we succeeded in cutting them out of joining their fellows up in Meuse-Argonne. It's like a sacrifice fly. We got nothing, we didn't get much out of that. It wasn't about defeating them. It was just about pushing them back past Metz. And the last sector we were in was just to the right of Verdun. In the higher area was the Neptune sector. I don't know, I'd say Neptune sector is about the size of Belmont altogether, that sector, and we were in charge of that. And that's where we fought until the Armistice. The problem with the Neptune sector is that it had been fought over prior to that. It had been fought over during the Verdun battle, which was 1916.
Hellish.
What was left were many, many old trenches. In addition to old trenches, there were a lot of shell holes. So at night, the troops had to get down in these shell holes or these old trenches, and what they ran into, if you get this letter's description of this, you get bones,
Horrifying.
leftover bones from not the year before, but 2 years before, 1916, Battle of Verdun, and it's disgusting, smelly, scary, very, very bizarre, and a lot of battle debris and sometimes unexploded shells, and it was because it had been abandoned for a year and a half. So now you're plowing through all of this, and also the Germans were deeply dug in at Neptune, so it was inch at a time. It was a slog. We never got past the Neptune sector because by the time we would have gotten past the Neptune sector, by that time it was the Armistice. and it was all over for us, for the Yankee Division. We never got into the main corridor of the Meuse-Argonne Valley. We were still over on the right-hand side. So altogether, 2.5 million people made it to France. And out of them, there were about 130 divisions that got across, and only 89 saw action. And by the way, just so you know, out of the 89 divisions, including Federal and National Guard, we were number 4 in effectiveness. Now, I can't, it's hard for me to explain that. There's some kind of a rubric they have. It's like, you know, how many meters you advance, how many men did you lose per meter, what was the whole, there's a whole series of numbers you got to plug into this formula, and I don't know what that is, but we were rated number 4 of the 89, which is a significant accomplishment for a bunch of Boy Scouts.
Johnny, get your gun, get your gun, get your gun. Take it on the run, on the run, on the run. Hear them calling you and me every time.
Armistice Day came out of a realization on the part of the Germans that they weren't going to win this. Billy Mitchell, father of the Air Force. The Air Force back then was part of the Army with the support of the French. He put 1,400 planes in the air, darkened the sky. And when the Germans saw that, when we counterattacked at Amiens, it was over. They weren't going to win the battle. That was the second battle of the Marne. And they couldn't prevail in the second battle of the Marne because they got stopped at Amiens. And that's really, the war was over by then. See, the problem with the armistice is it's not a treaty. It's not a surrender. It's a stop fighting. It's a ceasefire. And the assumption was on the part of the Germans, oh, well, it's just a rest. We'll come back when we get some R&R. Because the soldiers, when they came back from the armistice, didn't behave like they had been defeated. They marched in parades to tumultuous cheers and ceremony. The Germans never got it that they had lost because they were never told, because the German government was lying to them. Wilhelm's ambition and his inability to make good. He lost the 2 most important battles of the war were the first Battle of the Marne and the second Battle of the Marne. Remember now, Germany lost the first Battle of the Marne. If you look at the causation of the war, imperialism, militarism, and nationalism, those are the reasons it happened. It should never have happened.
Fighting days were done, and